Welcome to the Rebel Souls podcast, where we flip the middle finger to the status quo. I'm your host, Shelley Paxton, lifelong rebel, liberator of souls, and author of Soulbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best life. Settle in as we dive deep with badass leaders who are rebelling for what matters most in life, business, and the world at large. I'm so happy you're here. Let's get this revolution started. Before we begin, I want to share an offering from my soul to yours. If you've achieved traditional success only to realize that you're living someone else's dream, then this will start you on a profound journey toward becoming chief soul officer of your own life, just like I did. I'm gifting you a free chapter from my book, Soulbatical, a corporate rebel's guide to finding your best life. It's called Liberating from the Shackles of Should. And if you're ready to, then visit soulbatical.com to download it for free. That's SOULBATICAL.com. Warning, side effects include intense joy and fulfillment. Hello and welcome back, my fellow rebel souls. Happy Monday if you're diving into this as it's hot off the presses. This is my final interview during what I'm calling International Women's Month. So you guys have heard me talking about the fact that I'm committed to celebrating women all month long, not just on March 8th, which is International Women's Day, when we drop the episode with Claire Wasserman. I'm super excited that I've got these three badass women. First Dahlia, then Claire, and now Helen Appleby. She's a dear friend. She's a fellow coach and a woman on a mission. She's also another corporate refugee. You guys have heard me use that term, and I love that she brings it up in the conversation. She has an incredible background, having risen through the ranks of Unilever and also GlaxoSmithKline in the pharmaceutical business, rising to be a VP running a global piece of their business, a global division, basically, that was worth $1 billion. Their $1 billion respiratory health business at GSK. And along the way, she learned a lot. She learned a lot about what she loves and really wants to do. She learned a lot about whose dream she was following. Hint, hint. We have a lot in common there. And she learned a lot about what it means to be a woman climbing the corporate ladder and how to do that as a woman. And she defines it as really understanding what are the unwritten rules. What are the things that we really need to understand and practice so we can see more women at the top in leadership roles of corporations and leadership roles in countries? What are the things we need to do? And then how can we support each other as more and more of us get into those roles? So we really dive in. We dive into Helen's story, and we dive into a handful of the unwritten rules that she's written about in her new book. So if you're watching the video, here's a sneak peek. It's called The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership. Step into your power, write your own rules, and succeed in your career, whatever it looks like. And the beautiful thing is we talk about the fact that both Helen and I are on this mission. We both lead movements, mine around liberating souls, hers around getting more women into leadership positions in the world. And we both left corporate to do it, but you don't need to. And her book is chock full of how to succeed, how to get more of us there. And also, hello, guys. Hello, my fellow male rebel souls. I know you guys listen. I love you equally. And I love that Helen's book and our conversation end with, how can men help? What can you guys be doing to advocate for women? where you work and in the spaces in which you lead and have influence and have a platform. So it's powerful. This is for everyone because this isn't simply a women's issue. This is about getting diversity of thought and leadership. That's women of color, that's men of color, that's people of color. Who in more and more places where decisions are being made. So I'm super excited to wrap up International Women's Month with this conversation with Helen. You guys are going to love her. It's juicy and it's practical. There's stuff you can start doing right now. And I had more than a few kind of, remember the old V8 commercials? I'm totally dating myself, but where you like smack your forehead and you're like, wish I would have known that. I could think back to, especially my time at Harley, things where I was like, oh yeah, I was kind of like, put your head down, do everything for the company, bend over backwards, you'll get recognized and noticed. And while in some instances I did, there's so much I realized I could have been doing differently that also, I might not have felt so burned out and so empty on the inside. So this is a good one, you guys. Let's dive into my conversation with Helen. And ladies, let's keep supporting each other. Men, please keep advocating and supporting the women in your world. And that doesn't just mean your daughters. Let's all start living by these rules. And like Helen said, we're rebels after all. So let's fucking make up some of our own. Let's change the face of what leadership looks like. All right. I love you guys. Let's dive into the conversation with Helen. Enjoy. Hello and welcome back, my fellow rebel souls. Okay, so we're in the midst of, I'm calling it International Women's Month. We're past International Women's Day, and I made a commitment to really, throughout March, interview some badass women who are role models and inspiration and mentors for me. And one of them is my dear friend, Helen Appleby, who's here with me today. Welcome, Helen.
Hey, Shelley. Lovely to be here.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. It's so fun just to listen to you talk. And honestly, I was geeking out on Helen right before we hit record on this, you guys, because I've spent time with Helen. I've been on her podcast, and I finally had a chance to read the book. Helen's brand new book. All the stuff that she's been living and preaching for years is actually a book now that we can all buy. I have gone through this. Mine is dog-eared and highlighted. For those of you watching this on YouTube, you could see it. I was showing it to Helen earlier, but it's called The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership. And I even Helen, I love the subtitle you landed on. Step into your power, write your own rules, and succeed in your career. And this coming from a woman who's had a pretty fucking amazing career. So we're going to get into all the juiciness. You know what I'm going to ask you. I'd love to start with the question, what are you rebelling for?
Thank you, Shelley. I am rebelling for two things, really. And I guess one sort of fits under the other. But like for women succeeding and finding their version of success, right? It is succeeding in your career. But, I think success looks different for everybody. And finding the success that is really in our hearts is what you and I have both done and what I help women do, whatever that looks like, right? And the other thing that I'm really, really passionate about, and I know we both are, is sisterhood.
Yes.
Right? And women helping other women. There's been a boys' club forever, and and then there was Queen Bee syndrome as a few women broke through, and the times are changing, right? And now there's a sisterhood, and how I'm rebelling for women succeeding and then women helping other women to succeed too, and us pulling together, because the research really clearly shows that when you have the support of other women who have the support of other women, do better. And it's just easier, right? Doing it on your own, you and I know, right? Doing that shit on your own is hard and it's lonely And leadership, to some extent, leadership is lonely, but we can make it easier, and we can make it easier for each other if we do it together. So there you go.
Yeah, I love it. And doing it alone is unnecessary. I talk in my book, and I know we'll dig into this because I want to get into your journey to what led you here to really discovering what these unwritten rules of success are, and to the work that in the world that you do today. And there are so many parallels with my story and what I wrote in Soulbatical. And one thread throughout this picks up on what you just said, which is I was so afraid to ask for help. I didn't know how. I thought it was a sign of weakness. And I loved reading in your book, you reinforcing that exact message. Like, actually, it's not. It is the thing that will be the stepping stone or the springboard to success.
Yeah, absolutely. I really encourage women to ask for help. And also, because I find that they don't, right? They genuinely are like us. And we were like that too, right? You think you have to do it by yourself. But also, the other thing that I really help women with is just permission, right? I think if you have a sisterhood around you, you have women that are 2 steps ahead of you, or beside you, that give you permission, right? Women often just need permission, it seems, to have a messy house, right? To get help, to get great help, to all of that stuff, right? We can really, really help each other.
Amen. And anybody in my community who's listening to this knows I say all the time, like, I subscribe to the Brene Brown permission slips. Every morning, writing yourself whatever permission slip you need in that moment to show up as your most authentic, badass, and powerful self that day. Because you're right, we're not in the habit of giving ourselves permission. We're so tough on ourselves. And it's one of the reasons I love that your book started with this idea of self-leadership, right? Because we can't succeed if we aren't dealing with the inner stuff and doing the inner work and really giving ourselves permission, telling imposter syndrome, like, hey, enough, right? I am worthy. I am enough.
Yes.
So I've already got us diving into your book. So wait, maybe comment on that. And then I want to take a giant step back because I want to dig deeper into your journey that led to even discovering this stuff, because I'm sure, like me, you had a lot of stumbling blocks along the way.
I did. And, it's interesting. One of the things I was really conscious when I wrote the book was that this book is not about fixing women, right? Women are not broken. But some of this stuff we can help ourselves with, and we can help each other with. Some of what goes on at work, as you and I know, though, is not just about self-leadership, right? That, misogynistic leaders, sexual harassment, unconscious bias, all of that stuff is real.
Very.
And that's the bit that is much harder to change, right? And change needs to come from so many different directions. But self-leadership for me, and the reason I start with it, is, like you say, it's really the foundation, right? Sometimes you can't change that stuff. You can only change your reaction to it. And I guess linking back to permission slips, right? Sometimes if you can't change it, and if you've done everything that you can, right? If you're still not appreciated and this is not soil where you can grow, like, leave.
Yeah.
Right? That permission slip of, I say to clients sometimes, or, and women that I'm talking to just in advising, right? You're not a tree. Get up and leave if you need to. So yeah, leadership on many levels, isn't it? And definitely there were times, and you'll see them right in the book, there were times when some of that external stuff got in my way. I definitely, hashtag me too, and the unconscious bias, all of that stuff, I talk at quite at length about, it took a while for somebody to take a chance on me, as they called it. right? Because the research says men are promoted based on their potential and women are promoted based on their track record. And how can you, have a track record if you can't get the global role, right? How do you get the global role if you haven't got a track record, right? So I kind of circled around that for a while. And there were things, looking back now, there were things that I could have done that I didn't do well enough because I didn't know. So that's really the premise of the unwritten rules. It was the stuff that nobody told me how to do well, right? How do you ask for a mentor, right? I kind of like, the fact that mentors help you, that's not really an unwritten rule, is it? Like, we all know that. But like, what do you do if you're not asked, right? What do you do if everyone above you is looking after and hanging out with and playing golf with the guys? What do you do then? I didn't really know. And maybe, honestly, Shelley, now I'm 50 and I look back, I was 5'8", blonde with big boobs. I don't know if they knew how to ask me either. Right? So that was like probably unwritten for them too, right? So how do you do that? How do you have that conversation in a way that's not weird, right? That took longer to learn, right? How do you stakeholder manage? How do you think about who will be in the room when your next role or promotion is discussed, and how do you work with them so that the meeting really happens before the meeting? All of that stuff was just not explained to me. And of course you find out in the end, but it could have been so much easier. I would have cried less in the bathroom if I'd known the stuff that is in the book now.
100%. And I felt the exact same way reading your book and reflecting on my 26th year. I mean, you and I spent about the same amount of time in the corporate world, in senior marketing roles, VP roles at global companies with global responsibilities, working around the world. And I was reading your book going, oh my God. Like, if I only knew, I was having some flashbacks of oh yeah, I did kind of what you say at the beginning of the book. You're like, yeah, I would have done this differently, this differently, this differently, and this differently. And that's why you're on the mission you are, to share this with women and to help women help themselves and help each other. And I think it's so powerful that you're on that mission, and that you kind of approach it with sort of an I got you, like an arm around you. Like, I wish I knew these things, and because I do now, I want to share them. Let's let this not be a secret. And that's kind of, I wrote my book with that same kind of tone of voice. It's like, I wanted to say, I got you, because I wish this book would have existed when I walked away from Harley. And you wish this book would have existed when you were climbing the corporate ladder. So it's really beautiful. Thank you on behalf of all of us, and on behalf of wanting to change the statistics of the number of women at the top of the corporate ladder. This is huge. I'm so glad that let's talk about this. Let's talk about how you landed on this as your mission, right? So you have this incredibly successful career. You're vice president of it was like $1 billion division of GlaxoSmithKline, right?
Yeah, the respiratory health business globally. Yep, on the
incredible. You had lived all over. You had climbed the ladder there, and yet, what happened where you said, no, you know what? I'm being called to do something different. What was the path then that led us all the way to the work you do, the work you do now, and the book that I just read and loved and want everybody to go out and buy?
So what happened was I had a coach. And
fancy that.
I was on one of those, high potential programs, right? And they get you a coach. And that was great. And I was talking with the coach, and I said out loud to the coach, I like growing people more than I like growing brands and businesses. Oof. And the coach kind of looked down at the table in between us, like the words were kind of out in the open and in front of us and between us. And he said, so what are you going to do with that then? I was like, oh shit. Yeah. I said it now. It's out.
The genie is out of the bottle, Helen.
Genie's out of the bottle. It was never going back in. And it was 5 years, Shelley, between when I said that and when I left. It was 5 years. to
Interesting. Okay.
train as a coach, to get accredited, to have internal clients, to sort out, to land in the US and, get to a point where I could walk away. So it wasn't, I didn't like go on vacation and decide I wanted to run a juice bar. It was just a whole thing. It was a plan. And it's interesting, when I actually did leave, and maybe after a couple of years, like the first 2 years were kind of rough. The first year in particular, there was crying then too, in my pajamas at 11 o'clock in the morning. But looking back, I'm like, wow, like if I'd known it was going to be this easy, I would have done it years ago. And then I have to remind myself, if I'd done it years ago, maybe it wouldn't have been this easy. Yeah. So, but it was that, the answer to your question is that it was that realization that, I was a decent marketeer, but actually what I was really good at was the leadership piece, right? And actually what I was better at than marketing was hiring really smart people into marketing and getting them to do great work and, having them in a team that was aligned behind a vision and healthy and all pulling in the right direction and all growing. And doing that piece was actually what got me out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
Hence, then, how do I grow people and get paid for it, was being a coach. And then, so I started off coaching really senior leaders and working with lots of CEOs. And there's part of my practice which still does work with senior leaders and CEOs. And some of them are men and some of them are women. But I think, you and I know often in terms of the work we do, we look back to our past, don't we? And we want to help the people who have been on the journey that we're a little bit ahead on. Yeah. And hence then this work of, I wish I'd known this, I wish I'd known this, which through, digging and refining and working with coaches, people like Rich Litvin, who you and I both work with, found this name of the Unwritten Rules. And really, once you kind of, I don't know, once the light's on, it never stops burning, does it? I just knew at that point, it's like, this is it. This will be my life's work, right? I'm very clear. And the book is my story and what the research and, what my clients have taught me. But, what I'm really, this is a platform, right? And the podcast and the other work and the community that I'm building is really about, okay, these were my rules, but if this is about writing your rules, then what are, fabulous women around me like Shelley Paxton, what are her learnings, right? And how can I give Shelley Paxton a platform to share what she learned on her journey? And really, where did she struggle? How did she overcome it? What does she wish she'd known back then? Yeah. Right. And so that's then kind of the broader sweep of it. I guess I'm kind of careful that, these are my rules, right? They may not be yours, right? Because I'm not walking the exact same journey that you walked, but how can we, get out of our own way? How can we accelerate? There's accelerators and decelerators in our careers, aren't there? How can we maximize the accelerators and minimize the decelerators so that we can succeed? Because, honestly, longer term, how will we get more women senior in organizations? Get more women senior in organizations.
Oh my God. I highlighted and underlined that in the book like 5 times. I was like, exactly. Yeah. It's that simple and it's that hard, but it's actually that simple. Right.
And there's still more CEOs in the Fortune 1500 called David than there are women.
Every time I hear
we're not there yet.
No, every time I hear that statistic, it's like the hairs on the back of my neck just stand up and I'm having that exact experience right now. And I just want to, there's so much yumminess in here that I want to start pulling apart. And I really do want to talk about a few of the unwritten rules and dive in, because I would love for every rebel soul, woman who is listening to this right now, and even the rebel soul men who can help a sister out, which is something that, because I love that you end your book with, I love how you say, like, how can men help? So I would love to get there. So let's talk about some of the unwritten rules. I just want to reflect on the fact that what you shared in your stories, like, you honored your soul. Once you let the genie out of the bottle with, like, I love to grow people more than I love to grow brands and businesses, it's like, boom. And how many times do we all say that? And then we spend like a decade trying to stuff the genie back in the bottle, instead of saying, well, how could I take tiny steps forward to make this happen? What would that look like? And as you say a lot in the book, what if I got curious? What if I simply, like, I didn't let it freak me out, I didn't panic about it, I just started to get curious and maybe unravel it a little bit and explore it a little bit deeper. And I took what was like a year that I was kind of having my nightmare and ultimately laying the foundation for me to leave Harley. You said it was 5 years for you at GSK. But what I love is you honored your soul and you realized you were living your dad's dream, which were, I mean, you and I have connected on this before. Yeah. Exactly my words. Like, I realized I was living my dad's dream. And by the way, it served me well for a very long time, as it did you, right? And you
we used to say in our house, it was unwritten. But in our house growing up, you could be anything you want as long as it was blank director in a big company, right? And you could choose it, fill the blank with what kind of director you wanted to be, right? And we've got, finance directors, digital marketing directors, investment banking, investor relations directors, and I was the marketing director. And then you get to a certain point in life and you're like, oh my God, right? And that was my dad's, like, I actually, before he died, I actually had this conversation with him.
Oh, you did? Like, say more, please. I want to hear about this.
Yeah. And I said to him, look, that's what you taught us. And and he said, yeah, but that's what I learned. He said when he was young, his dad told him, you can't go to college, you can't go to university because I can't afford it. So go get a profession. Right. And he went and became an accountant, right? And he did his articles. He never went to college. And so he was taught, right, to get a profession. And then he said through that, he's worked for big companies. He worked for Exxon, Esso, for 27 years. And he said he noticed that, how well people in big companies did. And so he said that was kind of, then he believed that was the route to success. And I said, so, becoming an entrepreneur was like completely fish out of water for me. I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs at all.
Me either.
And he's like, well, that was kind of what I was taught. And then he said to me, but like, in the end, I want you to do what makes you happy. So whatever I made it mean I could only do that because that was what he knew and kind of subconsciously what he communicated. But he's like, you can do whatever you want. Like, I just want you to be happy. So, and so he said, and by the way, like, it's worked so far, hasn't it? Like,
wink,
you didn't do bad following my rules.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced the same in many conversations we've had since I left Harley. My dad had his strokes, and I know you lost your father. And these are crucial conversations that we're afraid to have. You talk about difficult conversations in the book. These are some of the difficult conversations to have in our life as well, because, sometimes these are real expectations put on us. Sometimes there are interpretation of expectations, but you really were shining a light on, like, following your soul. And if not now, then when? You and I both did this kind of in or near midlife, right? Or midlife as far as we know. We don't know. We don't know our journey. But I thought that was really beautiful. And what you said at the beginning of the conversation about like your journey looks different than my journey. Yes, we both ended up, leading movements and starting coaching practices and all the things, but that's kind of where the similarities end, right? We're doing very different work. I love that it's aligned really beautifully, but I always say, I'm not on a mission to get people to leave corporate America. I'm on a mission to get people to live more authentically, courageously, and purposefully. And you're on a mission to help more women succeed in their careers and then help each other, which is really beautiful, right? So let's talk about what does that look like? Like, let's start to dive into what are some of your favorite, or maybe the things, the unwritten rules that come up the most often in your coaching and in the workshops that you do. Let's start diving into a few of those.
Sure. The one that is really often stops women in their tracks, and when I do talks, I really kind of work this through with women, is the unwritten rule is there's visible work and invisible work, and we only get judged on our visible work. So the question I ask women is, as you look at the work that you do, the value that you add and the results that you deliver, how much of that is visible to the people that will be in the room next time your next role is discussed? And what I often find with women, and what was definitely true for me, is that we kind of do good work and hope that it will be recognized.
100%. That is definitely my lived experience. I was the one who was like, head down, I'll get it done, super valuable to the company, I'll do anything. And yeah, didn't spend a whole lot of time doing some of the great stuff you talked about in the book.
Right. And so they do that. And then what I'll say to them is, you realize that that's not how the game works, right? You realize your boss is really busy and nobody's going to come and find out, right? It's your job to tell them. And I kind of knew that too, but then it was like, oh, but that's called self-promotion, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
yucky,
it feels yucky, right?
Right, I have to do that. Ooh, right, and that's something else on my damn list, right? And I'm supposed to be networking, and hashtag nobody's got time for that, right? But the pivot for me is thinking through that, right, and getting really real that if they don't know, then you won't get credit for it, and that is just a terrible waste of your talent and your time. And how do you sit down and say, okay, what is my invisible work and who needs to know? And then what your job then becomes, not to self-promote and to brag and to boast, but to educate. How do I educate the people that need to know what I'm up to? Right. And so set up a meeting and brag about yourself for half an hour, Helen, was like, right? Can you educate those people on what it is you do, and just tell them and update them and, help them understand? Oh, I can do that. And I could really do that authentically. And so, often women say they have no idea, right? If I left, they'd have to get 2 people to replace me. They've no idea, they should know, I shouldn't have to tell them. It's like, come on, girlfriend, stop it. It doesn't work like this. You've got to do this. You have to teach them. You have to educate them. So that's a big deal, right? And in terms of impact on people's careers, right, what the research says is getting visibility of your results is one of the biggest things you can do to shift the trajectory of your career. And the other one is mentors, right? So really being purposeful, like I said at the beginning, right? The fact that you need mentors, not really an unwritten rule, is it? But how to ask, working out. And again, we do this on the course, we do it in the talks. What are the 3 journeys that are ahead of you? 3 conceptually, right? I made that number up, but having mentors takes time too, as well as homeschooling and all the other crap we're doing at the moment, right? So, but if you think about what are the journeys ahead of you, so mine were an international career in marketing. So I've lived and worked in 6 countries. So, how do you do that moving was and how do you do it well, and how do you bring your spouse and manage the kids and get on the list and do the relocation, negotiate the deal. All of that kind of international moving thing was a big journey for me, and I needed mentors and got great mentoring actually around that. And then the other one was the actual succeeding in marketing career. So what did I need to do in terms of new product launches and building my resume, my marketing resume. And then the other one for me was doing that and being a mum along that journey. And so a lot of the time as well, the whole working mum guilt thing, right? Give up the guilt is something I talk a lot about with mums, and realizing that you have to really decide, are you a better mum if you go to work or if you stay at home? And I was very clear that I was a better mum if I was at work. And then how do you then do that without feeling guilty? And again, the reframe for me was, you are a role model for your kids, right? There's plenty of research, and I list it in the book. There's plenty of research that says that kids of working mums, right? The girls earn more, they are more independent, they do better. And the boys, when they get married, they help their wives more, right? So it's not going to harm the kids.
Yeah.
Right. So the guilt is on us. And I say to women, be the role model that you want your kids to have, right? If you're going to work, if you've really decided that you're a better mum because you work, be a mum that loves work, right? Be a mum that loves her life, is creating a life that she loves. And let your kids see that, not you, feeling guilty for not being at every soccer game, right? They're going to be fine. I did not go to every soccer game at all. And, my kids had amazing opportunities and a better life because I worked. So
you told such a cute story. What was it that, I think it was your
Alex?
What Alex said, his classmate. Will you tell that story? It proves exactly what you just said, which lights me up.
Yeah. So when we lived in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, it's an expat community, right? The Western community is an expat community, and none of the women worked. And there was this one other working mum. We clung to each other, and she's called Claire Kenny. And our kids happened to be in the same class at school. And Alex came home from school one day and he said, "Mummy, Joe and I, we're the smartest in the class. I think that might be because, you and Claire work. You're the smartest mums." And I tell that story in my book. And actually, Claire Kenny just came on my podcast. She's amazing. She was like running the Asian division of FIFA back then.
Wow.
Football Claire, as I called her. She's a badass, right? And now runs her own agency. But yeah, you can see that for my, it's so funny, isn't it? The kind of meaning that what happens and what we make it mean are often, like we write our own stories in our head, but the story that was in Alex and her son's head was that they were the smartest because they had mums that worked.
I love it, which is like, but it puts that positive spin. It's like, God, we stress ourselves out with guilt and all this other stuff. And it's like, you're right. Those are just stories in our heads. They're not even reflective of the reality. And the fact that you heard that from your own kid, I just thought was so beautiful. And the other thing that feels related to this before we move on is, you talked about, I wrote these down because we're very aligned on how important self-care is. And I love that you made this point, and it feels relevant, especially if you're, a mom with a full-time job and a huge career and all the things. You have this concept of giving it all, but not giving it all away. And I was like, oh my God, amen. And also a little jealous that I didn't think about that phrase myself, because I was like, shit, that's good. So can you talk about how you think about that, and even maybe what you do or what you've coached your clients on? Because I think all of us as women really struggle whether with whatever, our multifaceted lives, whether we're moms or not moms, whether we're in full-time careers or not, we tend to always put ourselves last. So I was like, thank you, Helen, for putting this on the list, because we need to hear it over and over again. And the sisterhood, we need to hold each other accountable for caring for ourselves, right?
And give ourselves permission.
Yeah.
As well.
And we're back there again, the permission,
back
right?
There,
yeah.
Right. And that's where come on, so giving it all and giving it all away, like, I think inevitably when we do these kinds of careers, they are really challenging. They're nonstop. They're constant, aren't they? And, to succeed and do the things that we did, right? And to do the things to get to those kind of levels, right? It's hard work.
Yeah.
It really is. You do have to give a lot, and you are well rewarded in return, right? So the giving it all, I've done it too. I've been in hurricanes in Mexico, sat on a market research debrief on vacation with the kids, right? It becomes kind of a little bit of work-life integration, and you become like, always on, and you have to, navigate that in a way that works for you. But it is a lot. So the giving it all, right? Working really hard, we do, right? And you will have to succeed in this corporate career. But the giving it all away is when you lose yourself.
Yes.
Right. And when you don't have boundaries, and when it becomes depleting and unsustainable, and then you become resentful, and you don't show up, in a way that will really help you succeed, right? So for me, there's another story in the book, which was I was at work at 10 o'clock at night, and I was working for Unilever at the time, and the head of market research walked by, and she said to me, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "Oh, I'm working." In that kind of, women in their 20s, overcommitted to their career kind of way. And she said to me, "Helen, I want you to know," she said, "it's a marathon, not a sprint." And she's like, "You need to give a bit less, right? Give 95%, not 110. And she said, because A, it'll make it sustainable for you. And B, do you know what? They won't notice."
Yes.
Right.
And C, can I add a C? Because I think you even said this in the book, and it's what always goes through my mind. And I coach a lot of my clients on this. Your 95% is a lot of people's 120%. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's like all of those things combined. It's like, guess what? Like, let's give ourselves permission to just like, pump the brakes a little bit, care for ourselves, because it is the age old. If we got nothing left to give, we can't show up as our best selves. You can't be leading this mission. I can't be leading my mission if we don't have the energy and the inspiration to show up as our best selves. So thank you for including that, because I feel like we as women just keep needing to be, whacked with a 2x4 on that one.
On get help, right? If you can afford it, get help. And guess what? If you want to have your hair done in the middle of the day, just do it. Give yourself permission to get your hair cut, or, go get your nails done in the middle of the day, because they won't notice. You won't get any thanks when you're on email at 8 o'clock at night, right? So screw it, do it.
Screw it, let's do it. I love it. I love it. We used to have a similar tagline at Harley that just totally took me back. That was really funny. So I want to talk about this concept. You started diving into mentors, and it is clear that having mentors, like, first of all, each one of us saying, what's really important to me? What's the track or the tracks that I'm on, right? The journeys. And then who can I find that can help me, right?
Who's at least 2 steps ahead of you, right? And mentor shares their journey with you. So they have to be, ideally, they're at least 2 steps ahead of you. They don't have to be the CEO, but just someone who's a couple of steps ahead doing what you want to do can help.
And how do you approach them? Because
don't be shy.
Yeah. I would, well, no, exactly. And you say this a number of times in the book, like ask for what you want, right? So I think that's really important because as women, we don't always ask for what we want. So what does that look like? So I want to talk about, you make this beautiful distinction between a mentor and a sponsor, and you need both. So let's talk about let's wrap up with the mentor, right? Like, yeah, how do you approach somebody if you have somebody in mind, but maybe you don't know them? Like, what advice do you give? Because often that can feel awkward for us as women, right? What does it look like?
And so what I say is get really clear what it is. So let's play between us. So I would reach out to you and say, Shelley, I love what you've done with the book and how you're building a movement, right? If I'd been 5 years ago, right, I'm looking to do the same, right? I want to write a book for other women and build the kind of, movement that you're building. Could we have a coffee and could we talk about that? So in a work situation, that might be like, Mark, I noticed that you moved into finance. I'm interested in moving into finance too. I'd love your advice on that. The key is ask for advice. Okay, set up the meeting. And then what it does is it makes it very clear why you want to talk to them and that you're asking for their advice. And then that makes it clean, right? It's not weird, right? What does she want to talk to me about? And then once you're there, give them an update, talk to them about what you like about what they've done and ask for their advice, right? And then listen to the advice, write it down, right? And go and do it or take some of it. And then follow back up with them in a few months' time and say, hey, I'd love, you remember when we talked, Shelley, you suggested I did this, this, and this. I've done it. Can I give you an update? Yes. And I've got some more questions, right? And then as you build that relationship, then you can say something like, it's so helpful to have a mentor to help me, right? And remember, like the key thing to remember here is that psychologically and unconsciously, people support what they helped to build in all walks of life, right? That's why you can get kids to eat vegetables if they helped you cook them. Right? So I
love that one.
That sense of like, oh, if Mark was mentoring me, he's senior in finance, he's moved into finance, he now knows that I want to move into finance, he's helped me, he saw that I took his advice. Remember, the bigger the ego, the easier it is to tap into, right? Oh, well, Helen took my advice and Helen's amazing. And, Helen was like, oh, I can help there. And it's at that point that a mentor, right, moves into a sponsor, because sponsors are different, right? Mentors share their journey with you. Sponsors talk about you when you're not in the room. So they advocate for you, right? And sponsors are like that next level. They're like a second level accelerator for people's careers. Often we find sponsors from the people that we worked for, or the people who know us really, really well and have seen our work. Because remember, to advocate for someone when they're not in the room is like a personal risk. You're endorsing, Shelley or Helen, like they'd be great for that role.
Yeah, it's your reputation on the line.
There's some reputational risk there, isn't it? Because what if they get into the role and they're like, well, Mark said she'd be good. She's a disaster, right? And that's like a black mark on him. So sponsors need to understand that they can advocate for you. And having another source of those sponsors is your mentors. If you build great mentor relationships, then when you're not in the room, Mark will say, oh, there's a role come up in finance. Oh, has anybody thought about Helen? And get you on that list and accelerate you. So and you can't really ask for sponsorship. You can't say, will you be my sponsor? But what you can do is thank you so much for your advice. I did this, I did that. It's working. What else could I be thinking about? And, I love your advice. And then at that point, if a role like that comes up, could you remember me? Yeah. Right? Could you let me know? Right? Is there anyone else I should talk to? Right? Could you introduce me to them? Like at that point, then you're moving that relationship from just a mentor relationship into a sponsor relationship. And so visibility of women's work or people's work and having the right support are the two things that really make a difference. And it is work, Shelley. It is work, right? I struggled with this because I found a lot of the times my ex-bosses were leaving. So I had great sponsorship and then they'd leave. So you have to kind of keep working at this over the years if the people that are your advocates leave. So it's kind of a conscious process that requires some work and some tools, right? And and the knowledge that you actually have to do it, which is what the unwritten rules are for.
Well, I think this is what is so powerful. And I've seen like this through line from the beginning of our conversation. I was just remembering you when you said earlier when we talked about the invisible work and making that visible and having those conversations. And it's like our default mindset, especially as women, is typically, I know mine was like, hashtag who fucking has time for this, which is exactly what you said. And I think this could fall in that same bucket. And I love that you are saying, no, actually, when we start thinking about all of our responsibilities in our jobs, in our careers, this is a big bucket that we have to allocate time and energy to in order to be, accelerating our, our own potential, like putting the rocket fuel in the rocket really is what we're talking about. So thank you for that reminder, because I know I was honestly, definitely, oh, go ahead.
I actually don't think, for me, it's about the awareness, right? I don't think once you have the awareness and you have the framework, I don't think it actually takes that much time to do. But it is interesting, isn't it? As we move from kind of being an individual contributor to succeeding through others and rising, there's the awareness that, this is now our job, right? And getting mentors and getting sponsors, right? And managing your stakeholders. That is your job. It's not your job to do the work anymore. It's your job to make sure the right work gets done. And that this stuff then becomes your job.
I love that. Yes. In addition to growing the people and the other things that we talked about, you're right. Because
setting the vision and the direction and growing the people and, managing the external stakeholders.
Well, and you quote Marshall Goldsmith in your book, but the all-time famous "what got you here won't get you there." This is exactly what we're talking about. And I love that reframe within the unwritten rules, because sometimes we're like, well, the game's not that we think the game is the same. We understand that it's different, but we maybe don't know how to play it. You mentioned another great example of this where it's like the pre-meeting, like the meeting actually happens outside of the room, and the work that we need to do and the conversations we need to have to ensure something gets sold through in the meeting. That was really important that you highlighted that, because that was a big lesson for me too. It's like, oh, wait, shit, was I the only one who didn't have a conversation before walking into this room? And is that why my stuff isn't getting sold in?
And it's so disappointing, isn't it? I genuinely believed, it's a bit like that thing that we talked about at the beginning. Like, if I just do good work, it'll be noticed. I thought I could kind of come into a meeting with this, like, ready baked, like the French waiter almost, and go, tarantara, and everyone would go, wow, that's amazing, Helen. What great work. And instead they go, oh, well, I didn't know about that. Oh, what does that mean for my region? Have you spoken to my people? And it's like, oh, come on. And back to the mentor thing, right? People support what they help to build. Yeah. So the meeting actually happens before the meeting. And that made my life so much easier.
100%.
But that's quite a structured process, right? And again, ain't nobody got time for that. It's your job.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. It's your job. That will get you there. Right? I think is so powerful. And the other thing, so just to continue on what you said in the beginning, let's talk about the sisterhood as part of what will get you there as well. So as we rise, as you and I both had really big titles in really big companies and huge responsibilities, and supporting our sisters climbing that ladder, whether in the I shouldn't say whether in the company, in the industry, right? And in the world in general. Let's talk more about that. Like, what does that look like? What can we do better?
Yeah. So it can be anywhere, can't it? Right. So obviously
Yeah.
in your team, right? There's so many ways you can support other women, right? I think at work, this kind of, mentorship and sponsorship, I really encourage women to think, right, if mentorship is about being 2 steps ahead of someone, and not being only the CEO of mentors, right? Who are you 2 steps ahead of,
Mm.
and who can you mentor, right? And look at the list of people that you spend time with, who you have coffee with, right? Because you might not, officially be like, oh, I'm their mentor, but like, who do you spend time with? Who do you give advice to? Who do you care about? Right? Make a list of those people, and then look and say, do they all look like me? And what do I notice about this list? Right? And again, coming back to that thing of, if they don't look like you, then they have to ask, or you have to ask them, right? Look at your list, right? Are there women of color on that list, right? Because again, they tend to be the most marginalized at
Yeah.
work. But really bringing some thinking to who's on that list. And if you're sponsoring, who are you advocating for when they're not in the room? Again, looking at that list, right? And I think even on a day-to-day basis, right? In terms of helping women's ideas be visible and helping women's voices be heard, right? Amplification is something I talk about in the book, right? So women often get interrupted, right? Men interrupt twice as often as women do, but they almost always, 3/4 of the time, they interrupt women,
Mm.
right? So interruption and being spoken over and, mansplaining and having your ideas stolen, right? That's all shit that we dealt with, wasn't it? I'm sure you did too, right? But helping other women, amplifying other women's ideas in the room. So Shelley just said that, or let her finish, right? Really helping another woman get the space that she needs to be heard can be enormously helpful. So the example I talk about in the book was in Obama's cabinet when he first started. The women in his cabinet were doing it for each other, and he noticed and he joined in. Right. So, being an ally to other women,
Yes.
can be, is a really, really important part of sisterhood, and really consciously thinking through who is on that list of your sisters and making sure that it's a conscious decision. And then, like I said, supporting each other. There used to be this, queen bee thing where so few women succeeded that, once they succeeded, they kind of wanted to slam the door behind them. And I quote that because I'm a Brit. And, back in the day, like Margaret Thatcher was a great example of that queen bee, right? She made it to prime minister in the UK, and she didn't help women at all. She thought women were like too emotional. She didn't like, those days need to be gone, right? We need to
100%.
help other women and support them. And, particularly now when we're all just, battling, many of us are battling with homeschooling and, parents that are not well, and, work life integration where all our boundaries are smashed, right? The more we
Yeah.
can reach out and just check in on each other and, have a glass of wine together and, give each other permission to, have dirty homes and and drink wine and, cry, the easier we can make it for each other.
I love that. I'm curious, where do you get that in your own life? what communities do you tap into? Have you built a community around the unwritten rules? Do you also have another community or communities that you tap in for that into for that? I'm curious because I like want to keep building it for myself too. And I feel surrounded, but I don't know if everybody's giving themselves permission to say, no, you know what? Another part of me caring for myself is ensuring that I'm surrounded by those people and I have those communities and those safe spaces to be in. And then I'm giving myself the gift of time to be in those spaces with those women. So I'm curious, what does that look like for you?
Mm, I do. And so, and sisterhood, like helping other women, is super important. For me, my sisterhood is not exclusively women. I call them my tribe.
Yeah.
Um, and I found, and you probably find the same thing, it's actually, for me, even harder now that I'm a coach. The temptation is for us to support others. So I've had to be really, really deliberate, right? If we're not careful in these roles, we can become the one that's holding space for everybody else,
Yeah.
right? And
100%.
your friendships become kind of like coaching assignments outside work, unpaid coaching
Yeah.
assignments, right?
Yeah, which is
Constantly giving
draining. Yeah.
career advice. And so you and I have to be even more intentional about how we do that and how we have friendships with friends that can hold us, right? And the tribe that I've surrounded myself with, some of them are other coaches, but it's very deliberate. It's like, we need a coach, right? We need other coaches that we can lean on and other sources of support where we can. One of the one of the questions that my tribe asked me is, what are you avoiding, Helen? Or what do you not want us to know? Right? To really make sure that we're held, right? And to make sure that we look after each other, and that, the our lives are reflected back to us, and they can spot our patterns
Yeah.
and spot us falling into our patterns again.
Yeah, I
Um,
love it. One of the communities I just joined, it's like, even having us go around, this one happens to be all women, but like you, I have, different communities that are mixed. And I agree. I love that. I feel like my tribe keeps getting better and better. And just like, I feel loved and supported and held by the most incredible people. I include you in that. And this one of the things we went around the circle and talked about was like, what is scaring the shit out of you at the moment? Because how many, like, I love the questions you just asked, and how often do we feel safe enough and that we're with the right people where we can say, yeah, you know what, like, right now, personally, for me, this is speaking to you, Helen, in real time, because I said this to you off camera, like, this situation with my parents is scaring the shit out of me. And I don't have, I have spaces where I can talk about that. So I actually spoke about that in this Divine Feminine Leadership Academy circle just yesterday. And I was like, I am so glad. Like, my shoulders just dropped. I felt this sense of relief. I felt like it was the biggest, longest bear hug of my life that I was getting from these women in terms of the love and support. And so I tell that story to say, we all need that. We all need that safe space and those people. So anybody who's listening, you guys, like, even as rebel souls, our reaction tends to be like, I got this. I got this. And this is the lesson I learned and why I wrote the book that I wrote, was like, it's like, well, no, actually, I don't got this. I need people, like you said, Helen. I need to ask for help. I need my tribe who can hold me and hold space for me, exactly like you said. So it's a
and
reminder to all of us.
I also said to you, Shelley, that kind of looking for permission, right? And a little bit of mentorship, right? You're ahead of me in many ways, but like, my dad died in 2015, and I gave myself permission in those last months to focus less on my business
Yeah.
and to focus on doing a good job looking after him. So, what we said at the beginning of this call is like, you know, like you have permission to, to structure this however you want, right? So that when they're not around anymore, you look back and you're happy with the decisions that you made then.
Yeah.
And if you need to, do less with your community or do less with your clients or take on a few less clients, you'll be back. They'll be there. It's going to be fine, right?
Totally.
Sometimes we need to do what we need to do, and
What I
that's okay.
love, I always know. So I said to you, and I'm saying this very intentionally for everyone listening, because I know a lot of us struggle with these same things. So Helen, thank you for reminding me of that, because I needed to hear it again. And I am realizing, I mean, I don't believe that there are any coincidences. The fact that I felt really passionate about keeping this recording with you. And I was like, it's Helen. It brings me joy. Like, I feel a lot of joy because I got a lot of joy from reading your book. I got a lot of insight. I adore you. And I'm like, I feel like doing this. But I've like cut a lot of stuff out of my schedule. And now I'm realizing that it's not just, oh, I love Helen and I love her book. I need to hear this message exactly right now in this moment. So we never know why we are somewhere. We never know why we're having the conversation, why we're really having the conversation that we're having. And so that was an incredible gift. I want to thank you for that and acknowledge you for that. So thank you. And I think it's important. We had that conversation off camera, not recording, and I love that it came back up again. Thank you for doing that, because it's like I this community knows, like I'm out there, right? I will tell you, I will be as vulnerable as I can possibly be. And so this is unfolding for me, like literally one baby step at a time. I have no clue what I'm doing. And yet I love, like, you were just such a mentor to me in that moment. So let's be open to those opportunities happening all around us every day, and what those little messages are. That was, that was beautiful. I feel like super just, that feel like warm and emotional right now. So I know I'm receiving it. I can feel that. Um, so here's what I would love to do. Can we? I don't want to end this conversation, but I'm also super conscious of time. What I would love to do to put a fine point on all of this is talk about what we mentioned early on. You end the book in a very specific way. And when I got to the chapter of like, so how can men support us? I was like, fuck yes, like cheering. I'm like, bravo. Didn't see that coming. And yet I was like, why didn't I see that coming? And what does that say? So I love that you're bringing men into the conversation. And there are a lot of men in this community. So talk to us. Like, how can men support us and be part of the tribe? Like the Obama example with his cabinet. What can more men be doing to help advance our sisters?
Mm. In my experience, Shelley, there is a certain type of man who can be an amazing ally, right? Any man can if they want to. But my experience is that often men with daughters, they suddenly kind of start to wake up, right? And particularly when their daughters are a little bit older and their daughters are starting to think about careers. In my experience, there's a moment when they're like, oh, I don't want her to do what I've done, or I wouldn't want her to work here. So, at its most fundamental level, I ask men a series of questions when I give a talk, and in the book, the most fundamental question I would ask men right now is: would you want your daughter to work in your team or to work in your company? Right? And if the answer to that is no, what are you doing about it? Right? And you may not be the CEO and you may not be able to change the whole company, or you might, right? But right, what are you doing? Right? How do you know your numbers, right? How much diversity is there in your team? How many women are at each level? How are they paid? Are they paid as much as the men for the same work? Right? Are they listened to? Are they heard? Are they interrupted? Right? Just how are you creating a safe space for women to be respected and listened to and, set up for success. And how are you growing so that, if you're not where you want to be in terms of diversity, how are you fixing it? And how are you helping them? So that at its most fundamental level, is how men can help. All men can help. And hopefully those questions will allow them to reflect. And, who are you? The same questions we talked about, right? Who are you mentoring? Right? Write the list. Do they all look like you?
Yeah.
Why? Right? How can you expand that list a little more and spend time with people that don't look like you? Right? Whether they be, men of color or women of color, right? Because we're naturally drawn to people that are like us in earlier life, and naturally, right? Looks like you and I, right? We're corporate refugees helping people in corporate, aren't we? Right? So it's normal. And once you know that, once you know better, you can do better. So how can you expand that list? Who are you sponsoring? Who do you talk about when they're not in the room? Make a list. Can you expand that list? So those are the kinds of questions, provocative questions I ask men to help them be better allies for us, and to make it better, like for the women that come behind us and for all of our daughters.
Oh, that's a powerful place for us to end. And thank you for bringing us there. So now that we've got everybody dying to read all of the other unwritten rules for women's leadership, where can they find you and where can they get your new book?
So it's all at theunwrittenrules.com, or the book's on Amazon, The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership. The podcast is wherever you listen to podcasts, including the episode with the fabulous Shelley Paxton. Yes. And there'll be a course very soon. So yeah, kind of all the usual places, but look for The Unwritten Rules, and you'll find it all there.
Where can people find you on the socials?
So The Unwritten Rules is a group on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, Helen Appleby, and Instagram, Helen Jane Appleby. Nice. But I'm more of a LinkedIn chick.
All right. So that's what I thought about you. And I'm like, do I see her on Instagram? I couldn't remember, but that's perfect. We'll put all of those links and all of your handles in the show notes, and also a link to your book. This has been incredible. I could talk to you for hours, and I would love one day soon to be back in whatever city we're in together. It was New York City before COVID hit, having a glass of wine, and I can't wait until that can happen again. I'm I'm just honored that you agreed to do this with me. And I'm really, really grateful for the gift you gave me in the course of this conversation. So thank you.
I'm grateful for you, my love. Grateful that we're in each other's lives, but grateful that you're in my life too. Yes. And
Thank
Nathan, we
so
miss
much.
you. Wine in Central Park.
Oh my God. And Nathan Seaward, we miss you. Oh God. He's another one I want to get on the podcast. Another. Totally. Well, I'm going to send him an exclusive link to this one. So that's awesome. I hope you guys loved getting to meet my friend Helen. I felt like we were having another one of our awesome chats in Central Park with wine, but we need to do it for reals when this COVID thing goes away. So thank you, my dear. And thank you to all of our fellow Rebel Souls for listening in. Love you guys and see you next week. Bye. Hey, Rebel. Thanks for listening. If you were inspired by what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review so our fellow Rebel Souls can find us. We have big work to do together. And if you want to dive deeper, head on over to my website at soulbatical.com and follow me at Soulbatical on Instagram. Until next time, stay bold, brave, and badass, and never stop asking, what am I rebelling for?